Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the June 2026 UCLA Tarjan Center Distinguished Lecture Series. I'm Dr. Jasper Estebio, Director of Training for the Tarjan Center, and it's my pleasure, as always, to be here with you all today. As we welcome you to our lecture series, we'd like to thank and acknowledge our co-sponsors, the UC LEN program, the UCLA Center for Autism Research and Treatment, and the UCLA Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Research Center. A couple reminders before we get started. Firstly, enter your questions for our speaker into the Q&A throughout the talk, and we will facilitate discussion at the end of the presentation. Please also remember to complete our evaluation survey to provide feedback and suggestions for future lectures. The link to the survey will be sent in the chat today, as well as in a follow-up email later this week. Now I would like to introduce our speaker. Good morning or good afternoon. All right, Dr. Nicole Rosen is a postdoctoral fellow at the UCLA Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior. She was awarded a postdoctoral fellowship through the Autism Science Foundation to lead the Next Generation Siblings Project, also known as NextGen Sibs. Dr. Rosen also works in the Bilingual and Spanish Interdisciplinary Clinical Training, or BASIC-T program, which is a partnership between UCLA and the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health to implement provider training and education and evidence-based psychological assessment to support the needs of community youth. Dr. Rosen completed her doctoral training at UCLA under the mentorship of Dr. Kathy Lord, during which she led various sibling research studies, provided assessments and interventions to neurodiverse youth and adults, and assisted with the development and validation of novel autism measures. Her research interests center on examining and supporting the bidirectional relationship between autistic individuals and their siblings across the lifespan. Today, she will present on exploring the role of siblings in autism. Please join me in giving a very warm virtual welcome to Dr. Nicole Rosen.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Estevia, for the introduction. I am very excited to be here and to present on some sibling research and to tell you all about kind of what's happening in the world of siblings. So I want to again thank the Tarjan Center for inviting me to speak, and I will be discussing the role of siblings in autism. So during today's presentation, I hope you will walk away having learned about the importance of sibling relationships in autism, the perspectives and needs of autism siblings as they age into adulthood, and identify research and clinical supports that are available to autism siblings. So for some background, as many of you know, autism spectrum disorder is a really complex neurodevelopmental disorder, and we kind of characterize it by deficits in social communication over here in purple, and the presence of restricted and repetitive behaviors and interests in orange. And alongside these kind of core symptoms, we know that autistic individuals also present with various other kind of psychiatric and medical problems, in addition to varying levels of impairment in intellectual ability, language skills, adaptive functioning, and also a ton of strengths in these areas. But based on the amount of variability that we have in this whole picture, the level of support that is needed for these individuals differs significantly across people. It'll differ across time. And with all of these things said, family often plays a really important role in terms of support. So we'll zoom out a bit to talk broadly about sibling relationships and the importance in autism. And we'll be focusing on siblings for this talk because the sibling relationship is thought to be one of the most important relationships that an individual will have. And there's a lot of reasons for this. First, the lifelong duration of the relationship is really relevant for autistic individuals because difficulties in different areas of functioning tend to persist across the lifespan. And this often requires ongoing support from the family, and close family often includes the siblings. There's often frequent contact between siblings, especially when they're living together during childhood and adolescence. And then this kind of frequent contact allows for siblings to develop really strong emotional bonds, interact really regularly, and learn from one another across different settings. The involuntary nature of the sibling relationship is also really unique and particularly helpful in autism because the relationship in a lot of ways is given to the autistic individual without requiring them to seek it out or foster it. And we know in autism, developing and maintaining those social relationships can sometimes be challenging. And so having this built-in person who is there by blood, by default, is a really helpful part of the support system. Siblings have also been shown to help support skill development across different areas of functioning in kind of what we might consider like a teacher-student dynamic. And this learning happens through modeling, intentional teaching, and also just passive observation as the siblings go through life. And then finally, while we know social interactions are really important for development, we also know that autistic individuals often, again, experience some difficulty in this area. And so research in autism has actually shown that siblings tend to fill this interaction gap in socialization in a way that is supported, but it still mirrors peer interactions in a typical way. And these skills that they develop with siblings have also then been shown to generalize to interactions with peers. So siblings really play an important role. If we think specifically about sibling benefits in autism, the research is really limited, but preliminarily, what we're seeing is having a sibling in autism has been associated with greater adaptive skill development over time. And when we say adaptive skill development, what we're thinking about are the skills needed to kind of independently perform tasks on a daily basis. So your daily living skills, communication, and taking care of yourself and others. Uh, Having a sibling has been associated with greater social communication skills, nonverbal communication, and theory of mind abilities. And it's important to remember this is all in the context of autism, what this research is showing. It also happens in typical development, but particularly exciting that we're seeing it in autism. So while sibling research in autism is still, again, as I mentioned, relatively kind of limited, various studies have begun exploring what we're calling the sibling constellation factors and how those factors tend to influence outcomes in autism. And these sibling constellation factors can include things like just the presence of a sibling. So does the individual have a sibling or not? Birth order. So where does this individual fall in the birth order of the siblings? The gender of the sibling, the gender match of the sibling dyad or the sex match. And then there's also sibling behavioral characteristics. And so these would include things like the sibling's own adaptive functioning or the sibling's own social behavioral impairment. And these are really important because, and they've been kind of the focus of my recent work. And I'll break down kind of the state of the research for each of these factors briefly. But the idea here being that all these factors have been researched in terms of what is their potential role in understanding outcomes in autism. So, very briefly, and this is a very, very brief summary of what the findings are. I would encourage you and would be happy to send papers to anybody who's interested. For birth order, so again, where do they fall in that birth order? Youngest, middle, oldest child, or only child, if there's no sibling. For birth order, what we see is really no consistent effects on autistic outcomes across studies. Some studies show benefits of older kids, some studies show younger. And what we have seen on a few studies that have been replicated once or twice, we've seen a small benefit of having an older sibling on theory of mind and on social communication, though this definitely needs replication and it's an area of continued study. What we also know is that there's probably a lot of factors that are contributing to why there's kind of inconsistent effects. Potentially, it also may be that there are just inconsistent effects, and that's what we're going to see as we continue to replicate. But something to really think about is it possible that there are inconsistent effects because there's a difference in when these individuals are being assessed? Is it based on age? Is it based on what I'm noting here, a difference between simplex and multiplex families? And this simplex means where there's only one child in the family who has autism, that's simplex. And then multiplex is when there's dyads where two in the family, where there are two or more children in the family have autism, and that's a multiplex family or a multiplex dyad. And so my kind of recent research looked at, are there differences in very large samples of simplex versus multiplex dyads on birth order and the role of birth order on outcomes in autism? And so, just as a kind of plug for why it's so important to really look down into the nitty gritty of specific factors like simplex versus multiplex, the ages, things like that, we know that in simplex dyads, and again, needs to be replicated, stronger adaptive skills were found for the autistic sibling when the autistic sibling was younger than the typically developing sibling during those early childhood years. And then when the autistic sibling was older than the typically developing sibling during school age years, so that's 7 to 12 years. And that can be really confusing, but what's essentially happening is there's a benefit to being younger when kids are in that early childhood year, and then there's a benefit to being older during the school age years. And some things that my colleagues and I had kind of discussed as potential reasons for why this might be happening. It's possible that when there's one typically developing individual in that sibling dyad, then there may kind of the dyad may be following more of the common birth order stereotypes for behavioral modeling in a more consistent way and kind of predictable way. And multiplex dyads might have more variability because there's different heterogeneity in their abilities across the spectrum and across time. We also might be thinking about behavioral modeling as at its core, where if when we're seeing this switch in the direction of the effect for younger children, it might be more beneficial having an older, more skilled model of adaptive functioning when they're older or when they're younger, and having an older model. But then, as the kind of progress often slows as kids with autism age later on in those school age years, and the gap widens between what their current skills are and what we might expect of other typically developing kids, it might be more helpful for this individual to have a younger typically developing sibling who is a little bit less advanced chronologically and who might more closely match the abilities of the autistic individual, so they have more of a match in terms of a play partner. So just some theories, but this idea being important that it might be more than just birth order as a single concept, and rather the importance of age as a moderator, or simplex versus multiplex in terms of a moderator. Then sibling gender. And I'll quickly go through this because both sibling gender and sibling dyad gender match found no consistent effects on autistic outcomes across studies. It's been really mixed, and it again probably depends a lot on the sample. We know that majority of autistic individuals in research studies are male, and so thinking about how does that play into the gender match, and are there other age-related factors as well? What is a little bit more potentially exciting and intriguing, because the findings seem a little bit more consistent, even though, again, it's still an area of new study, are these sibling behavioral characteristics. So some preliminary studies have shown that the behavioral characteristics of siblings are significantly related to the adaptive functioning of autistic individuals. And when we're looking specifically at the siblings' own adaptive skills, it looks like when these siblings had stronger adaptive skills themselves, their autistic siblings had significantly stronger adaptive skills. And this was true for simplex and multiplex dyads. And what's notable is the effects for those multiplex dyads, so where 2 or more kids in the family have autism, the size of that effect was about double than those for simplex dyads. And so what that just shows us is that this is a really strong effect, and it was strong for both simplex and multiplex dyads. And it kind of tells us that this is probably, especially with this large sample, it's been replicated a few times, again, needs more replication. But when the sibling skills are higher, the autistic sibling skills are higher. And I'll talk about what that kind of means for practice. In looking at the siblings' own social and behavioral challenges, when these siblings had fewer social behavioral challenges, their autistic siblings had stronger adaptive skills. And so that's telling us that when there's kind of less impairment in the siblings, then the autistic siblings have better outcomes in adaptive functioning. And again, this was true for simplex and multiplex dyads. And then looking at the impact of the sibling's own diagnostic profile on the kind of maladaptive or difficult behaviors of the autistic individual. And this study found that the autistic individuals kind of showed more hyperactivity and irritability across time when their siblings themselves had diagnoses of an emotional or behavioral disorder, ASD, or a medical condition. And kind of taking a step back and just zooming out a bit, what this really, I think, seems to show is that the sibling relationship is not bidirectional, um, or is bidirectional. It's not unidirectional, because we know that siblings have a strong influence on each other across these various areas of development, adaptive skills, social behavioral skills, and it can be really important to think about this bigger picture and think about it in the context of who do we provide support and intervention to? Because when we incorporate siblings into interventions when they're showing some difficulties as well, even if it's not to the same extent potentially as the autistic sibling, we can probably see some benefits for both the sibling and the autistic sibling. And so really honing into this idea that it might not be enough to provide interventions just to the autistic individual, and it might be better for the whole family dynamic and especially the sibling dyad to provide services to both individuals to support their relationship and then also their own individual development. And then the big question is what happens to these individuals when they age into adulthood? We know that there's often a lot of research that goes into youth and when kids are, especially in autism. And in siblings, it has really looked at very, very little in infancy type ages. But we also know that these individuals grow up and they become adults themselves, and their siblings also age into adulthood alongside them. So we know that as these siblings age into adulthood, their needs change, their priorities change, their future family planning decisions kind of come to the forefront of what's kind of on their mind and what they're needing to establish. And because of all these things, we know our research questions need to change and our clinical services need to change. We need to be responding to the needs of these siblings. And so this kind of leads into our idea for some of the studies and clinical services that I'll be talking about from one generation to the next. Kind of how does autism affect you and your family as the sibling of an individual with autism? And when we think about kind of sibling dyads, we often hear the term unaffected sibling to describe the sibling without autism. And this unaffected word or term is a bit of a kind of misnomer because there's really no such thing as an unaffected sibling in autism. We know that the lives of siblings without autism are significantly and really forever influenced and affected by having an autistic sibling. And that effect is present in childhood as the siblings grow up alongside each other. During adulthood, as some of the siblings kind of think about having children of their own. During later adulthood, as the non-autistic siblings may be thinking about taking on caregiving roles for their autistic sibling. And so autism is kind of forever present in even in these siblings who don't have the diagnosis themselves. It's important to briefly discuss autism prevalence and recurrence as this factors into some of the things that I'll be discussing next. So in terms of what we know, again, the research is still limited in some parts of this because it's needing to be replicated across samples and bigger samples. But our current estimates are about 3.2% of children are diagnosed with ASD. About 10 to 20% of siblings of autistic individuals also have autism themselves. And so, again, these are siblings of autistic individuals. So there's already an individual with autism in the family present, and about 10 to 20% of those siblings have autism themselves. We know that when there's more than one affected sibling in the family, the percentage increases of the percentage of individuals who also have autism. So as if there's one sibling, the chance is 10 to 20%. If there's already two individuals in the family with an autism diagnosis, the percentage likelihood is higher for that next sibling to also have autism. And then this last group, we know 3 to 5% of individuals who have an autistic aunt or uncle also will have autism themselves. And we're calling this the next generation, and this will play into the study that I'm about to discuss. So this brings us to the Next Gen SIBS project. Again, the next generation, Next Gen SIBS, and this project was generously funded by the Autism Science Foundation. And this study, as I'll go into detail about it, is a multi-phase study really designed to understand the needs of siblings and provide support to these siblings as they start families of their own or start this next kind of chapter in their lives. And before we decided to kind of dive really into the phase of the study that we're in today, which I'll discuss at the end of the presentation, I want to kind of first walk you through how we got here, got to where we are now. And we really didn't want to just assume that we knew what siblings wanted or needed. Instead, we really wanted to engage adult, typically developing siblings of these autistic individuals in focus groups to understand their perspectives, their experiences, their needs, to make sure that we are providing research and clinical services to them in a way that's actually helpful. And that's why we developed this first phase of the study that is now complete. And it's our Next Gen SIBS phase 1 study. And we aim to engage typically developing adult siblings of autistic individuals in focus groups to discuss their experiences, kind of having an autistic sibling, their thoughts and feelings about how having an autistic sibling has impacted their expectations for the future, particularly related to decisions about parenthood for themselves. And then also kind of learn about their attitudes towards research and their willingness to participate in future research. Here's a basic methods outline. I am more than happy to provide more detailed information or answer any questions. But it was a multi-site study through UCLA and Emory University, and we conducted focus groups and individual interviews with the adult, typically developing siblings of autistic individuals, and we had 63 participants. We can come back to this later if people have questions, but I would just note the sex differences so that the non-autistic siblings are about 69% female, while the autistic siblings are about 77%. And this kind of tracks with us knowing that in autism, majority of cases of autism are male, and then with what we might expect for the siblings who decide to participate in studies like this, we anticipated potentially a female majority. So getting into kind of the key takeaways grouped into categories. And I'll preface the kind of results that I'm about to talk about by making clear that these findings are representative of the thoughts and the feelings of the sample that was included in this study, and that other siblings might feel very differently, and that's okay. And we welcome kind of all the feedback. But for the siblings who are participating in our study, these are the general takeaways. So first, looking at the sibling relationships, both past, so during childhood, and then current during adulthood. What we found was many of the siblings reported that sibling contact, and that can be in the form of face-to-face communication, so in person, messaging, video chats, that tends to decrease over time from childhood through adulthood as parents maintain the primary caregiving role for the autistic individual. And that's expected, but what we would likely see if we kind of continued following and asking these same questions is that the pattern might change as parents become older and need more assistance from the siblings in supporting the autistic individuals. Relatedly, there were kind of common barriers that were identified to spending time with their autistic siblings. And so unsurprisingly, physical distance was the most highly endorsed barrier. As the siblings grew up, they moved away from their autistic siblings for jobs or family or other reasons, and that made it difficult to maintain the contact with their autistic siblings. Second was social barriers, and we kind of use that to describe difficulties engaging with the autistic sibling due to communication challenges, attentional difficulties, and other barriers. And then finally, safety and behavioral concerns. And so this references when autistic siblings were aggressive with themselves or others, or engaged in eloping behaviors or other unsafe behaviors as a common barrier to why the siblings maybe spent less time with their autistic sibling. Now, some key takeaways related to family planning decisions. So, something that really surprised us, but probably shouldn't have surprised us, and we have kind of tangible ways to hopefully make this a little bit better. But many of the siblings were unaware or just didn't know the degree to which familial recurrence likelihood for autism extends to the next generation. So, in other words, the siblings' own children. And this was a group, again, of siblings who were clearly highly motivated and highly involved in their autistic siblings' lives, and many of them were highly educated. And so, while this was surprising to see, given that description of the population, it really represents a tangible and pretty feasible target for professionals in the field to just better support siblings in providing more education on genetic likelihood. When we dove a little bit further into this and we asked how genetics and probability of ASD recurrence in families factored into decision making, so those decisions to have a family of their own, the siblings really interestingly differentiated between their first child and their second child. And so many siblings had stated that if they decided that they wanted to have children of their own, they were going to have their first child, regardless of the increased likelihood of autism. If they wanted a child, they were going to have that child if they were able to. And this was in part because, as our kind of current genetic understanding stands, that the percentage spans a really kind of large range. And a lot of the siblings mentioned that since we wouldn't be able to give them a specific probability based on their specific situation, that it would be hard to kind of trust those numbers. And in part because they've grown up with an autistic sibling and they know that they would be able to handle whatever comes their way. With that second child, though, many of the siblings stated that they would be more interested in the genetics because this decision would no longer just be affecting them as parents, but it would now also be affecting that first child as the potential sibling. And knowing the difficulties that they personally may have experienced themselves as siblings, they were more kind of conscious of or open to the genetic information because they've been in that same situation and they're cognizant of what they're potentially putting their child into. Participation in future research. Really excitingly, all of the siblings who participated in the study expressed a really strong willingness to participate in future phases of the project. And many of them who were in this focus group actually did continue on to our phase 2, which is what we're in now. And a lot of them also reported that any other sibling research that could help them or other siblings like them, they were open to. So things like genetics, behavioral, cognitive, other areas of development. A lot of them expressed that they've for so long been left out of research and that this was really just exciting to be included and to be kind of the center of attention in this research because they want their voices to be heard and they deserve to be heard. Then research topics of interest for these siblings and how we can help kind of as researchers. So many of these siblings expressed a strong interest in better understanding the trajectories and outcomes in autism in adulthood. And this was particularly relevant because so much of the research, as we talked about before, really focuses on the younger years. And there's very little relative to kind of the total amount of research on autism in adulthood. And so, especially using longitudinal samples where we can make these direct connections. And we heard questions like, is my autistic sibling's aggression going to continue? Is it going to worsen? Is it going to improve over time? There's, of course, if that's kind of the question that's in mind, if this sibling has a young child of their own and they're living in the same home and thinking about bringing in their autistic sibling to live with them, they're, of course, going to be thinking about the safety of their baby. And if my autistic sibling is really aggressive, is that putting both of them in danger? They also ask questions like, is my autistic sibling going to be able to do things independently in adulthood? That is a very reasonable question of just knowing how much support am I going to need to give? Am I going to be able to work a full-time job and have kids of my own and support my autistic sibling? Am I going to need to be there full time? All really reasonable questions, and many others, but those kind of stand out. There were just a lot of unknowns in terms of what the siblings should expect from their autistic siblings. Some siblings also requested information about how to best support their autistic sibling as they prepared for the transition from living with parents to living with their sibling. So they asked questions like, how should I explain that to my autistic sibling that you're about to come live with me instead of living with mom and dad? How can we make that transition as smooth as possible? At what age should this transition happen? Should this transition happen before mom and dad um, can kind of suddenly no longer take care of them to allow for a gradual transition? Should it be a supported process where they're living with sibling for a few days, living with parents for a few days, getting used to both homes and both structures? Should we try to keep consistent structures and routines? Who should be involved in that process? And we have some guidelines, for example, for individuals with dementia and when it's time to potentially go into a supported living environment. But we really don't have that information available for autism, and it's a really relevant question. Siblings also wanted information related to taking on the caregiving role for their siblings. And so many of them expressed needing to kind of solidify their plans and especially the legal part of the paperwork related to taking over care for their autistic sibling before being able to even think about bringing their own children into this world. So wanting to make sure that they had kind of all those boxes checked so that in the event that their autistic sibling did need to move in with them or that they needed to kind of assume care of them legally, that everything was already kind of set in place so that that kind of weight was off their shoulders. And that was a big kind of thing that these siblings were talking about is just it feels really daunting and really overwhelming. And there's no set plan of how to do this. And so things specifically that they mentioned wanting more information about included transferring guardianship. So if there's conservatorship in place and the biological parents are currently listed as legal guardians, how do we transfer that into the siblings' names? How do we navigate Social Security? How do we kind of engage that process? They're getting older. How do we transfer the sibling into the role of coordinating that? Um, Accessing funds in trusts and wills. That's a big part, especially for thinking about the long-term financial piece to it. It's really expensive. And making sure that we have all of those things in place. If they've already been established by parents, how do we get those transferred over to the sibling? And then also securing housing options or supports that fit with the siblings' support needs. And so some of these siblings reported planning to have their autistic siblings come live with them. Some of them wanted to think about transitioning them to a home or group home with supports. But maybe moving to a home that's closer by or moving kind of to a home for the first time if they were first living with the autistic siblings' parents. So really making sure with the best intentions that everything was really thought through and that they're thinking about the well-being and the future and making sure that it's kind of the best future possible and that their autistic sibling was comfortable and safe. Many siblings also expressed a strong interest in receiving developmental monitoring for their own children, beginning at young ages, given that increased genetic likelihood of autism. And this will be really important as it kind of informed phase 2 of the study. And finally, the advice for younger self and new generation of siblings. We heard a lot of siblings give little bits of feedback of what they wish they knew or what they wish new siblings would know, having gone through the same or similar types of things as the sibling of an autistic individual. And what we heard were just a few themes. So the first one being be open about your needs and don't be afraid to ask for help. And this is talking about the needs of the kind of the non-autistic sibling. So going back to this idea that there's no such thing as an unaffected sibling, these siblings were really urging their younger selves and other siblings to speak up if support is needed and to recognize that it's okay to need help, even when it's clear that maybe your autistic sibling is also in need of help or needs a higher level of support, higher level of help than you do, that you still are, it's still reasonable that you also need help and to kind of speak up about that and to get the help that you need because you can't do this alone. Other ideas they mentioned kind of ask the questions and be part of the conversations, no secrecy. And this mainly pertained to this kind of common sentiment among the siblings that they were often left in the dark during childhood about what was really going on with their autistic sibling. And of course, they knew something was different, but they didn't really know what was happening and also what they could do to help. And there was a lot of confusion, maybe misinterpretation of things, some resentment, some shame. And this, a lot of it was kind of bred through secrecy, and open dialogue was encouraged because of that to keep those conversations going and to express needs and to learn information at a developmentally appropriate level, but to understand, why is my sibling hitting me? What are they trying to get from me? Are they trying to do this because they don't like me? And just really giving some context to that. And then third, learn strategies to connect with your autistic sibling in their unique way. Be creative. And this was particularly true for those whose autistic siblings did not have spoken language. Many expressed having difficulty kind of forming that connection and bond with their autistic sibling in the absence of spoken language. And they, for example, one individual talked about how their sibling would make these sounds, and they kind of identified that those the specific sounds and the tone of those sounds was really indicative of what the feeling was behind the sound, and being able to take that and kind of use that as the fuel for the conversation, and finding other ways to connect, like mimicking each other's sounds, finding other activities that elicit this really nice shared enjoyment. That's when the relationship they described really improved. So seeking those options out early and being creative and knowing that one size doesn't fit all, and being open that maybe one thing would work for a few weeks and then it would change, and just being open to the idea that this is a learning process, but it's important to try to find that way to connect. So this brings us to the current kind of state of the Next Gen SIBS project, again, generously funded by the Autism Science Foundation, and for phase 2, also the Hillebrand Foundation and ARIA. So we know, as I mentioned, that past research shows that siblings of autistic individuals have an elevated likelihood of having autism themselves. But those baby siblings are now grown up, and many are now having children of their own. And so this next generation is here, and we want to know, what does that next generation look like? We know that we have some nice infant sibling studies that are monitoring siblings of autistic kids, but what about this next generation? We know that they haven't had access to specialized developmental monitoring, but it can be really important. And that's where our study kind of steps in. So the Next Gen SIBS project tracks these children from infancy through toddlerhood across 8 sites in the US, Canada, and UK. So we have UCLA and UC Davis, we have Emory University in Atlanta, University of Miami, Birkbeck in London, University of Alberta in Canada, Washington University in St. Louis, and Yale University. So what is the Next Generation Siblings, or Next Gen SIBS project, in its phase 2? It's the multi-site research study, and we are exploring how autism traits run in families, and also hoping to just provide some support and developmental monitoring for these kids, for the parents. We are offering virtual or in-person visits at one of our 8 sites for those in person, or virtually. We can do it anywhere in the world. English is required, though. And as part of the study, we conduct developmental assessments at ages 6, 12, 18, 24, and 36 months. And the assessments kind of change across the time, but there are some consistencies in terms of what we are doing at the assessments so that we can track any changes over time. And then we're also at these different stages able to see different milestones and potentially different behaviors that are indicative of things that we want to look into. For this project, we provide summaries of skills, assessment reports. We'll conduct specific autism assessments and write kind of full diagnostic reports if that's present. to help with services. If there's any delays or just need for extra support, we can help with referrals for services. So, really just trying to support these siblings as they navigate this new stage in their own lives. Eligibility for the study. We are looking for families who have an infant 18 months or younger. The younger, the better. 18 months would be the kind of latest that we'd be able to see somebody at a visit. We'd be hoping more for the 6 or 12 months. And at least one of the baby's biological parents must have a biological sibling with autism. So this baby must have an autistic aunt or uncle. And this is the website for our NextGen SIBS study, nextgensibs.org. There's our email for the study. You can also email me directly. Both will come to me. Here's a QR code if you want to just scan it, and it'll take you directly to our website. And our website has a ton of information about every stage of the study, what each visit looks like, pictures of what's involved, what we're tracking, privacy things, how to get involved. It has some research kind of on the page for siblings who are interested in it. So I encourage everybody to visit that site. And then other research and clinical supports that I wanted to just briefly mention because I think so much of sibling support and research is left out of kind of common discussions about autism. And again, autism doesn't just affect the individual diagnosed, it affects the whole family. And thinking about how do we support these siblings and these siblings who have maybe different levels of needs and they're at different stages of their lives. So a few of the options, we could start with Sam Sib Stick Together. That's a really nice website that has a series of webinars that go through all topics related to siblings. It has sibling support groups, resource lists, and it's just a really nice place to kind of connect with other siblings who are experiencing maybe some similar things. And it's a nice hub for accessing a lot of information. We also have the National Autism Association. And what's really nice about the National Autism Associations, specifically, they have an ASD and siblings toolkit. And it's a guide that was essentially designed to help parents understand and kind of address the feelings or the challenges that siblings who have a sibling with autism go through on a daily basis. And that toolkit has been a really valuable resource for a lot of families that I've worked with. The Autism Society of America, they have a webpage for siblings specifically, and it has resources focused on coping with the experience of having a brother or sister with autism. So it's more designed for the sibling. We have the Organization for Autism Research. They have several resources focused on siblings and autism. They have a specific parents guide that's great to supporting siblings. They also, though, continue to address these siblings as they age. They have a teen sibling guide, and they, of course, have a younger sibling booklet. Sib Shop is a great kind of curriculum-based intervention, and it's more of a support network / intervention, and it's used throughout the world, actually, and it's just a really nice place for siblings to kind of come together, learn skills for navigating these different situations, but also to connect with other people who are living through similar experiences. We have the Sibling Leadership Network. This is kind of the broader organization that offers, it has different state chapters. They have sibling conferences. They have different policies and advocacy tools to help adult siblings become kind of informed advocates. So the things that we were talking about related to how do I transfer guardianship and how do I advocate for my autistic sibling, the Sibling Leadership Network can provide a lot of those great resources. And then finally, the Profound Autism Alliance. They're building a network of providers focused on really inclusive research. Again, it's focused on those more legislative changes and advocacy to improve the lives of both the individuals with higher support needs and their families, including the siblings. And I wanted to wrap up by giving a special thank you to the incredible sibling participants and their families. The research team who has helped in this project, our funders, and my mentor, Dr. Kathy Lord, for making this research possible. And you're welcome to contact me through this email or directly through the NextGen SIBS email, and I'm happy to give more information or answer any questions. But thank you very much.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Rosen, for this wonderful talk. Really highlighting the role and impact of siblings in autism. And it's so important, as you had noted, that there's no such thing as an unaffected sibling. And I think that that was one of the greatest takeaways that I got from today's talk. As our audience continues to submit some questions into the Q&A, I'd like to start us off. I know you talked a little bit about different kind of sibling constellation factors and things like birth order and behavioral characteristics. I'm seeing some questions about other constellation factors, so things like level of functioning or how impacted the autistic sibling is, step siblings versus biological siblings, and then the age gap. Is there any information you can share with our audience on those other sibling constellation factors?
Yes, those are great questions. And I think something that has been, currently in the works in our project, but it has been particularly challenging because when we think about step siblings, there's the piece of how long have they been in each other's lives, how closely, how much time did they spend together, which milestones were they together for, what parts of development, again, were they witness to. And so when we don't have control over those variables or have the amount of insight that we would want, it's really hard because there's so many other factors that are likely kind of playing into that. So that is a goal of our current research. We're collecting all of that information to be able to give some more specific answers that are a little bit more specific to that population rather than probably hitting on a few other variables that are kind of confounding the picture. But great question.
Absolutely, right? Like this is just the tip of the iceberg and opens up for a lot of other more specific, more nuanced types of questions, which I think our audience is particularly interested in. But I like the way everyone's thinking here.
Mhm.
I'm also seeing another question, Dr. Rosen, on kind of the demographics of the study that you presented on the families that were part of the kind of initial next-gen SIBS data. Can you speak a little bit about the demographic makeup, maybe go back to some slides if that is needed?
Yes, of course. So I will share this. So this is the demographic makeup, and again, wanting to highlight that this is the results are just reflective of the feelings and perspectives of the individuals who are participating in the study. But this was a sample of individuals who were recruited through UCLA and Emory. I'll actually go back here. For our UCLA site, we recruited through kind of broad social media pieces, through our community partners. We also have a longitudinal study of autism that is running and has been running for about 30 years. And so tapping into the siblings of those individuals. So what we're kind of partially looking at here is a sample of really motivated people who are familiar with research. And that, of course, is going to skew results because we're seeing people who really want to be involved in research who are really familiar with it. And from Emory, what they were kind of the recruitment source was typically their autism center. So families who had come through the center for diagnostic purposes or intervention services, they were being information was sent to them to kind of bring their sibling into this study. So a specific population, and again, not representative of all the siblings, but a good start. And just the whole goal was to really see is what we're planning to do actually of interest to you all, and would we be putting all this time and effort into creating a program that is wanted because the whole goal is to really support these siblings. And here's the demographic information. What we can see here is understandably the ages are pretty similar across the non-autistic siblings. These are the ones who participated in the study. And then we collected information about their autistic sibling who they were kind of talking about in the focus group. So mostly in their 30s. Again, primarily female in these non-autistic siblings. Oftentimes, those are the individuals who plan to take on more of the caregiving roles for their autistic siblings. Primarily white, about 20% Hispanic or Latino. We had a majority of individuals with high levels of education. 83% were married, around 60% had children. And then here on the autistic sibling side, this is where we see just differences in their education levels and the living arrangements. 27 or 28% of them were their own legal guardians. So we had a mix of autistic individuals who were high support needs and uh, lived in their parents' homes or with support staffs, needed 24/7 care. And then we also had individuals who had pursued a graduate degree. And so really able to speak to what would be of interest to these siblings who have autistic siblings with varying levels of support needs. But again, not representative of the bigger picture of siblings.
Thank you, Dr. Rosen, for clarifying. And I think this also is a plug for participation in research and amplifying the voices of others who might not be represented in that specific subset of information. I think that that's really the push with where research studies are now, is that we really want to expand and not only highlight a certain subset of individuals. I'm looking at some other questions here too. Um, I'm also curious, Dr. Rosen, about, many adults are diagnosed later in life now. Has that been something that's come up in this research, or how you kind of conceptualize, the quote unquote higher functioning or masking of symptoms, and then maybe a sibling has a diagnosis, and how you kind of think through that line of discussion?
It's a great question. And it has come up, and I think the context that we've mostly seen it in through our current phase of the Next Gen Sibs project is we have these siblings who have reached out, and through the kind of process of participating in our study and us seeing their infants who kind of go on to potentially receive a diagnosis of autism through us, then there's this sense of, oh, I remember my sibling doing that. And I remember those also being challenges for myself. Or I remember my mom telling me that I used to do that too. And then those parents going on to receive an assessment as well. Or things where these individuals or these non-autistic siblings initially are talking about how when reflecting on their autistic siblings' behaviors and development over time, they start to kind of piece together how those things were relevant to them, maybe in a very different form, or the level of support needed was different, but that support was still needed in some way, and kind of reflecting on how they have struggled and want clarity, just like they're kind of receiving for their own child, and wanting to kind of move along with that process.
Absolutely. And I think education, information, once we know more, then sometimes people are a little bit more open to understanding, and it can be helpful just for identity and knowing how to support ourselves.
Mhm.
Relatedly, I'm seeing another question here about parents. So not siblings, but it's a different line of research, but maybe Dr. Rosen, based on your, lit reviews and your background in this area, can you speak a little bit to the role of parents in their own diagnostic journeys?
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. So these would be the parents of the siblings.
Mhm.
And what we know about them is similar to kind of our information on the increased likelihood of autism compared to families who have no autism in the family. There's an increased likelihood that in these different generations that autism is more common. And so we've also seen, whether it's parents kind of coming in as the initial referral of saying, I'm concerned about my grandchild. So that would be the infant who we would potentially want to be seeing in the study. I'm concerned about my grandchild. And also, I remember doing those behaviors myself, or I remember those things being challenging myself. And it's often when you talk about these things we're finding that just being open about it and having the platform and the resources to engage in these conversations, a lot of things kind of come out, and it can be a family affair where it's parents participating, it's participating with the kind of approval of their child, who would be the sibling in our study, and just saying that they never talked about how that was hard or how they noticed those things, but it maybe got overshadowed by the level of support needed by the autistic sibling. And just thinking about this is a big family picture. There's often behaviors, and some of them kind of rise to the level of a clinical diagnosis or a medical diagnosis, and some are kind of below that threshold but still kind of really require ongoing support, and recognizing that the diagnosis as a label in itself is really helpful, but it's also important to remember that there's people who don't meet formal criteria who are also still struggling, and that there's support that's available, and that there's kind of communities of people who are kind of willing to help and want to be available and who are experiencing similar things and want to have that community. So reach out. There's a lot of resources out there that people just don't utilize or don't know about.
Yeah. For relatedly, for maybe for the parents or the providers in our audience who are working with school-age children, are there any resources, recommendations, supports that you recommend, Dr. Rosen, for SIBs of autistic individuals, maybe interventions, groups, support groups, any of those kinds of things?
Yes, we actually do. So, um, the SIB shop is a really wonderful resource. These are kind of intervention groups, and they're composed of siblings of autistic individuals. Usually they're around school age, or there's some groups for younger kids, some for older. And it's about just how to navigate life with an autistic sibling, and how to kind of maintain your own needs, and kind of get the support that you need, balancing kind of community and being the supportive sibling with also being able to advocate for your own needs. So SIB Shop is wonderful. These other websites have other kind of toolkits and resources if the sibling kind of just wants to read through things on their own. They don't want to be told what to do. It can be difficult coming from a parent sometimes. So having the sibling, if they're able to read and kind of engage with this information, there's a lot of really nice toolkits and packets of information. And the SAMSIV Stick Together, I think those webinars, there's panelists who are siblings of individuals with autism of different ages, mainly high school and college, but they're kind of speaking to their experiences. They're engaging with the people who are kind of providing research information. So really helpful resource here as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Rosen. And I know we're coming up at the hour. Um, to our audience, thank you so much for being here today. You can see Dr. Rosen's contact information there on the screen, and Rosen at mednet.ucla.edu for any follow-up questions that I know that we could sit here for quite a bit of time and just unpack so many questions. So feel free to contact Dr. Rosen directly. Last things before we wrap up, please do complete our evaluation survey so that way we can continue to provide very interesting lectures such as the one presented today for our lecture series. Thank you everyone for being here today, and thank you again to Dr. Rosen for such an informative and important talk. We're really looking forward to hearing how Next Gen SIBS goes, and hopefully hearing updates on the next generation of research. All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time. Enjoy the rest of the day. Bye now.